Hey guys, it's Wednesday, yay! So while I wait for everyone to join that's gonna join, just to throw up that disclaimer, remember everything that we talk about today is just for education, inspiration only. You know, it's not medical advice. I don't know each of your cases. I don't know what's going on with you, and it's your job to kind of take your own experience and what's going on with you and take the information we share today, we talk about today, and go and do your own research. This should kind of be a springboard for you to get some, we can throw some ideas around and then you go and do your own research. So just want to throw that out there because I think sometimes people take my advice or my information and implement everything, and I want you to keep yourself in mind because I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know your body. You live in your body, and it's super important for you to know your own situation. What are my thoughts on the Whole30 diet? You know, I think that it can be really effective. Let's say if you're coming from standard American diet or something like that and you need something structured to get you out of the mess that you're in. However, I do think the demonization of sugar, I think the demonization of most carbs, it's very difficult to get enough carbs when you're on Whole30. You can totally get enough. It's just, I do like the emphasis on getting your carbs from root vegetables, but then there is an emphasis on nuts and seeds in Whole30, and I don't think that those are a great replacement for grains. Like if you're taking grains out of your diet and you're replacing them with nuts and seeds, it's like what are you even doing? So I prefer a little bit of really well prepared grains over nuts and seeds any day. But I think Whole30, it's really in context and who you are as a person. I think there's a lot of people that struggle with eating disorders. They love rules, and so when they do Whole30, they get in this really weird food funk where they now think that the things that Whole30 doesn't allow are bad, or like, oh, I'm off Whole30, on Whole30, off Whole30, on Whole30. I'm sorry, I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend my whole life on and off of something when it comes to my eating. It's exhausting. Postnatal recovery, losing my hair. Hair loss is pretty common postpartum, but it's going to be more common for people who have hypothyroidism postpartum and have low progesterone postpartum. So those are two areas you really want to evaluate after each and every pregnancy because your thyroid takes a hit when your estrogen levels are high, like they are throughout pregnancy. And so it's very important to recheck in with your physiology. You're completely different than you were before pregnancy and during pregnancy. And so now it's really a good idea to get your baseline, figure out where your thyroid is, figure out where your progesterone levels are, figure out where your estrogen levels are, and do the work accordingly. A lot of people love to say like, oh, I have estrogen dominance or whatever. And I'm like, you're a completely different person than you were before your pregnancy. So you might have been super balanced before pregnancy, but if you're not feeling super balanced after pregnancy, then you really want to evaluate the things that took a hit during pregnancy. And it's just, I don't mean take a hit, like it's just hard on the body. It's hard on certain parts of the body. And if those areas are already slightly struggling, like for example, your thyroid health, they're really going to struggle when you're building and nourishing another human being as well. So it's just important to kind of remember that. But if postpartum hair loss is not made better by making sure that you're getting enough calories, remember your calorie needs go up about 300 to 500 calories when you're breastfeeding. And so if you are not eating enough to become a baby milk factory, then your body's going to prioritize baby, and things like hair, not important. But a bit of postpartum hair loss is pretty normal. Hi Jess, do you have any recommendations for grass-fed finished gelatin or collagen? Personally, I use Great Lakes. I know it's not grass-fed and grass-finished, but I like the quality and I find that it's the one that sits the best with me. Some people say that Vital Proteins works better for them. I think it's just really a personal preference, but I have seen no problems with Great Lakes collagen and gelatin, and I really like their quality and their dedication to staying pretty steady. What could an overproduction of tonsil stones indicate? Usually any type of calcification or stones often points to calcification in my point of view. So if somebody's having constant like kidney stones or gallstones or tonsil stones, I'm always going to look towards if their first level minerals are balanced. So for example, calcium needs to be balanced out with magnesium, sodium, and potassium. If you have really elevated calcium, but your magnesium levels are low, probably going to be a problem. So usually calcification is going to be one, a magnesium deficiency, and number 2, a vitamin K2 deficiency. So a lot of people are vitamin K deficient. And remember, vitamin K and vitamin D are needed to get calcium to where they need to go, which is the bones and the teeth. And so if you don't have enough vitamin K and you're taking vitamin D, you're going to cause calcification of the tissues because the body can't get it to where it needs to go. And so oftentimes people are supplementing vitamin D, not realizing that it's actually causing their stone issues. And so that's another thing to think about. But usually vitamin K over time and getting your magnesium levels up tends to take care of tonsil stones and things like that. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's like oxalates or digestive dysfunction. You're really sensitive to things called oxalates, and the digestive system needs to be focused on a lot more. When is it okay to add back in coffee if you've removed it for a bit while working on adrenals and HA? Decaf easier to transition to? Yeah, decaf coffee still has a bit of caffeine in it, about 20 milligrams, which is very little, but it still is enough to see if you are feeling it. And that's a great place to start, especially if you react really badly to coffee. That's where I would personally start. And then you can go like half, then you can go to a full, but kind of keep in mind that a full cup of coffee that's brewed like at a normal strength usually has around 200 milligrams of caffeine. So 200 milligrams of caffeine versus 20 milligrams of caffeine is going to be very different. So if you're doing okay on decaf, you might not want to jump straight into a caffeinated cup of coffee. But you know, a lot of people, there's no right time. If you know how you react to coffee or caffeine. If you're like, hey, I have like mild anxiety, then you know you can always just experiment. But if it's going to be really wreaking havoc on your day, then I would start really small with the decaf and then work up to like half and then work up to full calf. I meant half calf, not half. Thoughts on topical prescription retinoid creams, specifically like Differin or Adipoline prescribed by a doctor, toxic? Honestly, I've just seen the studies and they increase our morbidity rate by quite a bit. You know, when they did studies on, like, for example, senior citizens that were using retinol cream, like more than 10 died while using those retinoid creams. And I'm not saying that they weren't going to die without using them, but you know, retinoid creams and vitamin A, just like Accutane, should not be messed with. And personally, I'm not a fan of high strength retinoids unless you absolutely need them. And then on top of it, you're also making your skin very sensitive to the sun. And so it's kind of like, for me, I personally know how beneficial the sun is for our health. And so if we're making ourselves super sensitive to the sun to where we almost have to avoid sun altogether, it just kind of is counterintuitive to me personally. But I think that's going to differ from person to person. I know my friend Sarah at Healthy Skin Glows talks about retinoids. She's not against them or necessarily like pro for them, but there's different strengths of retinoid creams. But if you look into the studies of when retinoid creams are studied, like a high concentration retinoid, they are not necessarily safe. I mean, they're deemed safe, but I always look at the research and decide for myself. Tips on painting a new room. Scared of the chemicals, but it has to be done. I usually just use like a low VOC paint and, you know, air it out, you know, let it kind of dry and air it out. Do it on a day where it's really sunny, where you can keep the windows open and you can really air out the house. Sometimes that means like waiting till more of like summer months or spring months, but you know, I personally wouldn't want to sleep in a room that has closed windows, closed doors, and has just been newly painted. I would personally run my HEPA filter until the fumes kind of went away, but you know, there's only so much you can do. Like even non-VOC paints are going to be still kind of toxic, but they're a little less toxic than your traditional paints. If already consuming bicarb and using chloride, do you think magnesium malate, glycinate, or L-threonate are beneficial? It really just depends on you personally. And this is where mineral testing is very important, because I do think when you're starting to actually tweak your health, you do need to like dial it in based on your own unique physiology. For example, if you're not holding on to magnesium because you're really boron deficient, no amount of magnesium supplementation is going to make you feel better because your cells are not retaining magnesium. So it's one of those things where I don't recommend going too heavy-handed on the magnesium until you know you need it and until you know that you have the other things that you need to retain it. Because using magnesium too much and not getting enough sodium and potassium in can be very hard on the adrenal glands. And then you start to create more stress in the body and more blood sugar imbalances. And then you have this whole other imbalance. So personally, I do chloride and bicarb, and will use malate and glycinate if somebody truly needs a ton of magnesium, is losing magnesium, or is very deficient in magnesium. But I don't just like take huge amounts of it. But I think like taking like 100 and 200 milligrams is probably going to be fine. Do you still practice red light therapy for your hair? I started it and have seen significant change in my skin. Yeah, I use red light therapy almost every day just while I'm working. I just kind of park it on myself and I'll like move it from side to side. I clamp it on, I use just like a clamp light that you get at the hardware store, but I clamp it on like you can get really cheap like light stands on Amazon, and yeah, I just like clamp it on this little light stand and move it around my head so that I can get it on my scalp, on my skin, and just on my body in general. Is it possible your body tries to ovulate, fails, but then tries again on somewhat of a cycle? In hypothalamic amenorrhea, had all symptoms for a few days, but temps show didn't ovulate. Absolutely. Okay, I shouldn't say absolutely because I haven't found any evidence that this is true. A lot of people just figure like you either ovulate or you don't. But me personally, I do observe that most women's bodies are still cycling in one way, shape, or form. They are working very, very hard to ovulate, because think about it. A woman's biological purpose, I'm not saying our personal purpose, but the body's biological purpose is to reproduce. And so if your biological purpose is to reproduce, of course the body's going to be fighting to try to drop that egg. And during the follicular phase, we are very sensitive to stress. And so what I find is during the follicular phase, your body might try to ovulate around the time that you would normally ovulate, but if it can't, you're continually trying to ovulate until it just can't. And I find that really you're stuck in this, when you have HA, you're really just stuck in this long-term follicular phase. It's not like your cycle's gone, you're just stuck in the follicular phase. Your body is fighting to get those follicles towards ovulation to eventually have one drop, or one make it and win, and then that egg will drop out of the egg sac, and then once the egg sac is empty, that emptied egg sac becomes your corpus luteum, which will actually become your hormone gland and make you progesterone. So really what's going on is the body's actually fighting to ovulate. I do think that LH levels and FSH levels are a lot lower, so the brain is maybe not communicating with the ovaries as much, but I do think that the body is trying to ovulate, especially when you're working really hard to get your hormones back on track. So I have seen people with HA experience like a few cycles before they actually start their period where they feel like they're starting to cycle, but it's just not quite there yet. So yeah, it's definitely possible in my opinion. Thank you for all you do. I've been following your advice. I can drink coffee and dairy without issues, losing weight slowly, but surely everything is better. My hair is growing. I sleep better. That's amazing. I'm so excited. I love getting messages like that, and I get messages like that every single day. And it just it reminds me that you guys are working so hard, and I am truly so proud of you. Hey Jess, hope you're doing well. Hi Amber, I hope you're doing well. If using a vitamin K supplement that has zinc in it, is that an issue? It can be for sure. I don't really like supplementing zinc, period, unless somebody really needs it, because zinc can really mess with iron levels and it becomes this whole shenanigans. So personally, I prefer choosing specific nutrients, or if you're doing blends, they better be chosen very specifically. I don't know how much zinc is in it though. I mean, is it like more along the lines of 15 milligrams or like 2 milligrams? That's gonna make a difference. The only thing that hasn't regulated is my period. Well, you know, one of those things is, remember, it takes about 100 days for a dormant follicle in the ovary to make it towards ovulation. So remember, it takes 100 days to get to ovulation. If your ovaries have been kind of dormant, LH and FSH has not been communicating with the ovaries, your body is working towards ovulation, but it can take a while to get there. So 60 to 90 to 100 days is going to be around that sweet spot where you start to see leaps and bounds of changes. Before that, you do see a little bit of change, maybe slight and gradual. You're like, is there changes going on? I don't know. I think there are. And then you start to see like, oh wow, like my hair's growing, my skin's a little bit clearer. But towards that 100-day mark, you really start to be like, oh, then that's when the changes really start to gain momentum, is what I found. So really, like, you know, keep track. If you've only made changes, you know, a couple weeks ago, hang in there. It takes 100 days. What kind of protein would you suggest buying? I know you've mentioned organic chicken, grass-fed beef. It has to be grass-fed, maybe salmon. Yeah, I do mostly like shellfish, scallops, shrimp, crab, those types of things. White fish, so like cod, orange roughy, like I do barramundi. I'm trying to think of some other like just regular white fish. What else is another fish? Ling cod is a good one. You can usually find it at Costco. So like whiter fishes and shellfish. And then grass-fed beef is going to be the highest quality. Honestly, it's going to be the most bang for your buck. It's going to be more satiating. You probably will eat less and need less because it's much more nutrient dense. I also do like higher quality chicken, eggs, dairy, so Parmesan cheese, raw cheddars, things like that. I do lower fat milk as a protein source. I'll do casein protein powder. There's grass-fed beef bone broth powder or protein powder out there. So there's lots of protein choices. I will do salmon occasionally. I personally don't like to eat too many PUFAs just because I find that my digestive system starts to get wonky. So I'll have salmon once in a while if it's like really good salmon. But personally, I stick more towards the whiter fishes for the most part. Again, it's not like I avoid salmon at all costs, but I usually just, I'm like, it's a very expensive fish, so why am I going to purchase something that is going to like make my digestive system wonky? I'd just much prefer grabbing some cod. Extreme irritability, any nutrient imbalances that could cause this? I can think of like 1,000. So it's not really about like, is it a nutrient deficiency, but more than likely, I always think of irritability as like a craving for something, and it could be a craving for something emotional, mental, or physical. So if we're irritable, there's something inside of us that's trying to get out. Think of it like an angry red zit that's like about to pop. It's so angry, it's so irritable. Every time you touch it, it's like sore. And then finally when you pop it, it's like, oh yes. And I don't know if there's like zit popping lovers out there, but that's pretty much what I think of it as. It's like, it's one of those things where the irritation is building and building and building. It's like a volcano that needs to burst. And that could be anything. That could be, I find that people that are restricting carbs are really irritable. People that are restricting protein are very irritable. People that aren't eating enough are very irritable. People that aren't balancing their blood sugar are very irritable. People that are detoxifying heavy metals are very irritable. Or people that are bored are irritable sometimes if we're like bored or we're unhappy, or we have something, maybe we're in like our relationship, there's like something that's going unsaid, and so there's no one saying it, and so like everyone's snapping at each other. Those are kind of the things I think of when I think of irritability. But of course there can be like nutrient imbalances that cause it, but usually like a big fat ice cream sundae really calms the irritability, in my opinion. Like some type of ice cream. I'm a coffee ice cream lover. Some hot fudge, cherries, whipped cream, like the whole shebang. Comfort eating really does help sometimes calm our irritability, for sure. And I definitely encourage it sometimes. Like people are always like, well, don't emotionally eat. And I'm like, eating is emotional. Eating, you can't separate, the physical and emotional part of eating. And so sometimes something that satiates us both mentally and physically is helpful for kind of squashing our irritability. Why is consuming carbs only around or post-workout such a popular theme? I often have people mentioning we don't need to replenish with carbs until we've depleted the glycogen from our stores first. Well, your body's always going to be using stored glycogen, but definitely after a workout, you're very depleted in glycogen. So you want to make sure before a workout that you are your glycogen stores are pretty full, and after a workout, glycogen stores are going to be quite empty, and so you do need to replenish. But it's funny to me that people think that you can just replenish your glycogen stores after a workout and then like they're just replenished for the whole 48 hours or 24 hours on. You know, if you are living, if you are under any type of stress, if you are, you know, exposed to EMFs, if you are drinking toxic chemicals, you are going to use up glycogen. You're going to use up stored glucose. And so this is why it's really good to make sure you're getting a moderate amount of carbohydrate at each meal. Another thing to think about is protein's good for you, carbs good for you, but alone, usually they're not going to be that great for you. So if you're eating protein alone, you're causing way big blood sugar spikes and falls. So I really don't like this idea of like only eating carbs toward a meal. You can definitely eat and handle more carbohydrates before a workout and after a workout, because your body's going to put those right into the muscles and the liver. But you do need to be consuming carbs, maybe lower amounts, but still need to be consuming carbs all day long. You've talked about this so much, so I apologize, but why are carbs essential for women? Because remember, carbs break down into sugars, right? Glucose and fructose, and every single cell in your body uses glucose as fuel. So if you're not eating carbohydrates, your body has to make its own glucose. When you're not eating carbs, you're still running on sugar, honey. You're just not consuming it, you're making it. And you make it out of your muscle tissue, your connective tissue, your thymus gland, anything that you can think of. Your body breaks down the amino acids in those tissues, sends them to the liver, and the liver has to convert them into sugar. And then the liver puts that sugar into the bloodstream to keep blood sugar balanced. So many people say, oh, carbs are not essential, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking in my head, you are literally running off of sugar that you're making out of eating yourself. So when you don't eat carbs, you eat yourself. And to eat yourself, you need to be secreting cortisol, which is a belly fat hormone. It's the thing that makes us gain weight. That's that spare tire around the midsection. It also can cause hair loss, acne. It can cause our skin to look aged and aging. It can mess with our cycles. Anything that you can think of stress-wise, cortisol and adrenaline are what cause that. And so you don't want to be forcing your body to make its own fuel. It's not a good idea. If you're trying to heal your hormones and then you're forcing the body to constantly make fuel, you're going to be in a constant deficit and a constant depleted state. Do you recommend not using a bra? I've been using sports bra, but just curious on your thoughts. Personally, I like a little bra-age. I don't like going braless all the time because I have bigger boobs, and so it's just not comfortable for me, and I honestly just don't like when people stare at my boobs. So I personally will use today I'll have like a cloth bra on, but I try to, I like the least amount of bra that I can, and I like to wear a sports bra when I work out. But I do think that it's important for women to evaluate the type of bra they're using. If it's leaving any type of marks on your body, it's too tight, and it's impairing lymphatic drainage, and you're causing toxicity to kind of remain stagnant. If there are wires in your underwire, they're acting as little antennas. Remember, we have radio waves, we have electromagnetic fields, 4G, things like that, and so Wi-Fi, things like that, and so that is concentrating right towards our breasts. It's like little antennas that are saying, come near me, radiation. So I think that underwires are not a great idea. And just making sure your bra fits you. But I don't think that I think bras are for each and every person to figure out what they like and what they need. And I do own underwire bras. It's not like I don't, but I'm only gonna wear them for certain outfits or like certain occasions, things like that. Like I'm not wearing them every day, all day long, that kind of thing. Peeing around 4 times in the middle of the night, any thoughts? It sounds like imbalanced blood sugar to me. Anytime we're waking up to pee, it's a sign of adrenaline, it's a sign of stress. It can also be a sign that we're like overhydrating and we don't have enough minerals, but it's more likely like stress. Thoughts on aloe vera applied topically on the face? I think you said you don't prefer it, but I can't remember. I personally like aloe vera, internally, externally. It's very anti-inflammatory. I have mentioned before that it's slightly estrogenic, but I think that the benefits outweigh that factor. Hey, this is so random, but I'm really curious to know your thoughts on bee venom therapy. I know it's added stress on the body, but it's used as immunotherapy. I think it works really well. I think that bees are really amazing creatures that have a lot of healing parts of what they produce, and actually bee venom therapy has been used for a really long time, and a lot of people really like it. I personally have no experience with it besides just getting stung by a bee, but I've always been curious to try it. What are signs of low vitamin K to keep in mind while supplementing vitamin D? If you supplement vitamin D, you're most likely causing a vitamin K deficiency. Vitamin D is really, like, for me, it's a supplement that if anyone comes to me and they're supplementing vitamin D, I always know there's going to be issues. So things you would want to look for are like sensitive teeth. I mean, some people know, like, they've gotten bone scans and they have like straight up osteoporosis, or their bones are kind of wearing thin, or osteopenia. But like smaller signs are going to be like calcification, like little calcium deposits, whether that's in the tonsils. People get gallstones, kidney stones, skin issues. Vitamin K is needed in high amounts for skin issues, but honestly, most people are deficient in vitamin K. Unless you do tons and tons of high quality dairy, you eat grass-fed liver, and you grew up doing those things, most likely there's a deficiency of vitamin K. I want to try to keep my blood sugar balanced while super busy at work. I would like to bring a shake, but all the ones in FN include collagen. Can I sub something else for this if I can't yet tolerate collagen? Of course. Any protein powder, like the casein powder or bone broth protein powder, is going to be really like a good option. Remember, Felinor's is getting renovated right now, and so there's going to be 100 new recipes, or about like a new recipe book, I should say. I don't know how many yet. And new recommendations for things like protein powder and protein. There's going to be a whole lesson on protein, so feel free to exchange it for any protein powder of your choice. Or what you can do is omit it altogether and add something on the side, like, a grass-fed beef stick or an Epic bar or something like that if you're kind of on the go and you want to choose something. But I know sometimes it can be nice to put it in the smoothie, so absolutely. There's also if you're interested, there's something called muscle egg, which is pasteurized egg whites that you can add to smoothies and things like that. Drink them raw because they're pasteurized, and they come in different flavors, but muscle egg is another way to kind of get protein if you're reacting to protein powders and collagen and stuff like that. Was just diagnosed with scoliosis, sadly. Do you think this has any effect on fertility? I highly recommend checking out Mitigate Stress, the page Mitigate Stress, and also Kalana Fitness. They talk a lot about how myofascial issues, fascia issues cause crazy effects on the spine and cause crazy effects on posture and things like that. And so they have a lot of resources on myofascial release and working on spine issues. Anything that has to do with our spine, of course, it's our nervous system that's affected, but a lot of modern diagnoses for things like spinal issues are actually due to underlying fascia imbalances that are not being addressed or acknowledged in conventional medicine. What are your thoughts on foam rolling the body? I'm actually going to be adding into Fully Nourished a whole lesson on myofascial release because I do think it's so important. Myofascial release and trigger point therapy, super important for lymphatic drainage. Remember, guys, when we have a physical imbalance or a mental trauma, I should say a physical trauma or a mental trauma, or an emotional trauma, or an actual injury, the fascia, which is the connective tissue in our body, bunches up in certain areas. And once it gets bunched up, you can think of this web kind of being bunched up. Things start to stagnate, right? Like our lymph fluid cannot drain. Heavy metals are an issue. Toxins are stuck in that fascia. And so when you start to comb that fascia out and you start to work on it with trigger point therapy, and you start to do myofascial release with a foam roller to kind of start to straighten that fascia out, all that junk starts to get released. And now it's flowing through the body, right? The lymph fluid is now draining that into the digestive system, and the liver is filtering it out of the body. And so when we have tons and tons of tightness, whether it's emotional traumas, physical traumas, we need to work on those things, and that will contribute to our healing quite a bit. And then our spine is our nervous system, right? And so if our nervous system is constantly stuck in this state of fight or flight, which is kind of like tightened up and tensed up, we can never lower our stress levels. And so our posture is really going to affect things like digestion and nervous system health, and we cannot get proper posture until we work on our muscles and on our fascia. With understanding everyone's body is different and has different needs, how can you tell if certain good group works for you or is inflammatory? Like dairy, for example, a food group. Personally, I think dairy is an everyone food. If you can't tolerate it, there's something off with the body. I personally don't think bodies are different in the sense of like, oh, everyone's super bio-individual. I look at it from a different perspective. Every body needs nutrition, everybody needs nutrients, everybody craves nutrient-dense foods. If we cannot tolerate certain nutrient-dense foods, we've got a problem with our digestive tract, with our hormones. Remember, like something like dairy, for example, requires free T3 or thyroid function, requires progesterone, and requires a sterile intestinal tract. If we've gotten to a point where we have bacteria in our digestive tract where it doesn't belong, we have low thyroid hormone, we have low progesterone, and we're not digesting dairy, it's really silly to blame the dairy for being inflammatory. It's our body that is the issue that needs to be straightened out. And so personally, I think that there are foods that are going to be bio-individual, like beans and grains and vegetables. But personally, I think a diet that's lower in fermentable fibers is a good idea. Everyone's going to find their right balance of carbohydrates and their right balance of protein within a certain range. However, if we can't digest certain foods, and I mean like foods that are meant to be digested, like dairy and fruit and things like that, we need to actively work on those issues. Now, things like greens and beans and grains and nuts and seeds, those on the other hand need to be prepared in a very specific way to be tolerated at all. And so oftentimes we're eating tons and tons of these foods improperly prepared and causing constant stress on our digestive tract, and then we're blaming foods like, for example, dairy for causing all of the problems. It's ridiculous. So personally, I think that if we are seeing a problem with certain foods, we need to actively work on balancing our body. Most of the time, once we've achieved balance, meaning our gut's healthy, we have proper mineral levels, we're eating the right things in the right combinations in the right amounts, we've lowered stress, we've increased our thyroid function, we can tolerate most foods just fine. Ever since this quarantine, I've heard people talk about the benefits of sea moss. Any thoughts? Personally, I don't know much about it. I think it's kind of one of those fad things, but again, I don't know enough to really make a comment. Weight restored after severe eating disorder, but all hormones are ridiculously low. Thoughts? That's pretty common for post-eating disorder. It can take some time. Weight doesn't necessarily equal hormone balance, unfortunately, and an eating disorder or restricting for a long period of time is a state of famine for the body, and so the body takes a while to restore from that state of famine. But sometimes it actually requires gaining extra weight. Like a lot of people say like, oh, I'm at a healthy weight. Well, does your body deem that a healthy weight? Oftentimes it's about 15 pounds extra than we think is a healthy weight, is an actual healthy hormonal weight. Women from about 20 to 40 years old do better at about 30% body fat. That's pretty much like something that we would think is like a little bit overweight according to our culture, but in reality that's where hormones tend to thrive for menstruating women. Do you have to temporarily reduce carbs when treating SIBO and other digestive issues, or can I still consume ample fruits and roots during natural herbal treatments? If we think that we're going to clear SIBO with herbal treatments and going low carb, we're never going to clear SIBO. SIBO is self-induced bacteria overgrowth, meaning that if we have SIBO, it is from having a slow metabolism. When food transits through our digestive tract very slowly, bacteria and yeast ferment that food and will crawl and get up into that food. And so the biggest thing that we need to do when we're trying to win this fight with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is speed up our transit time by speeding up our metabolism. Most people with SIBO have hypothyroidism, and that's almost always the cause. And then so many people say to me like, oh, I don't have hypothyroidism. Like, if you have SIBO, you most likely have hypothyroidism, because the gallbladder requires the thyroid to function properly. And the gallbladder is really what's helping keep the small intestine clear of bacteria. And then, you need proper thyroid function to make hydrochloric acid, which is stomach acid, to prevent bacteria from making it into the small intestine. And then we need proper thyroid function for pancreatic function, which the pancreas makes its digestive enzymes. So overall, most of the time, SIBO is a metabolism issue, and we can take all the herbal treatments we want, but we're never going to clear it up because we're not fixing the root cause of the issue. So I think carbs are very important for clearing SIBO. I think reducing fermentable fibers is the most important thing. So tons and tons of leafy greens, tons and tons of cruciferous vegetables, tons of nuts and seeds, grains and beans. All of those work against us when we're trying to get rid of SIBO because they slow digestion down. We want our food moving through our digestive tract very, very, very quickly if we're struggling with any type of bacterial overgrowth. Does taking progesterone long term stop ovulation? It shouldn't. It shouldn't do that. But if we're not doing the right things, it's not going to help us resume ovulation or anything like that. What is ideal? Bedtime. I have such a horrible routine and keep going to bed at like 5 to 6 a.m., which is messing up my whole day. Yeah, I actually think that one of the most important things we can do for our hormones is get to bed by 10 p.m. If we're not regularly getting to bed by 10 p.m., then we are causing hormonal imbalances for the whole next day, but most likely for the next 48 hours. And it's just this vicious cycle. So getting to bed before 10 p.m. or around 10 p.m. is really important. We don't want to be up after 11, which is when we get our second wind, which is a cortisol spike, and then our blood sugar is going to be whacked for the whole 24 hours. In my little mini course that I just came out with, I'm going to announce it on my stories afterwards. It's called Mend Your Cycle Mini Class, and it actually has ways for you guys to get started for people that are interested in Fully Nourished but not quite ready to purchase it, or they don't want to purchase it quite yet, but they want to start working on some things. Mend Your Cycle Mini Class is now available, and it does talk about blue blocking glasses and how to actually create a bedtime routine to where you can sleep a little bit better and get to bed by 10 p.m. Would you consider a magnesium level of 2, magnesium DL, Mg, DL deficient? Blood levels of minerals are pretty inaccurate because you have no idea what your cell levels of minerals are. Remember, blood levels of minerals will stay pretty stable, whereas intracellularly you could be very deficient. So this is why I like hair tissue mineral analysis. If you have a blood test, it's really good to compare the two because oftentimes blood level minerals are the last thing to show imbalance, whereas hair levels of minerals are showing intracellularly what's going on, and it's a lot clearer picture of where we are in the cell. Hi Jess, sorry if you've covered this already. How do you know when you're in the luteal phase if you haven't ovulated? You're not in the luteal phase until you ovulate. So once you ovulate, your empty egg sac becomes the corpus luteum, which is why it's called the luteal phase. And the corpus luteum is a small gland that makes you progesterone for about 11 to 14 days after you ovulate. So if you don't ovulate, you're not in the luteal phase. Hi Jess, would you recommend supplementing boron to support magnesium absorption? Only if you're boron deficient. So this is where supplementing individual minerals can become very, very problematic if you don't know where your levels are. I don't recommend supplementing things like boron unless you absolutely know you're boron deficient. Things like borax in your foot bath, you can do like a bath or a foot bath with some borax in there to allow your feet to absorb boron. That might be okay, but I wouldn't supplement straight boron unless I knew I was deficient. Many people are, but not a lot. What toothpaste do you use? What about your cleaning products and also your clothing soap? Do you have a favorite brand? I use Branch Basics for all my cleaning products and my clothing soap, and then I'll add some Dr. Bronner's for some scent. And then for toothpaste, I use David's toothpaste. It's like this light seafoam green bottle. You can get it on Amazon. Are shrimp good to eat? I've heard such mixed things about how they are bred, carry lice. You guys need to stop stressing about natural foods, right? Like, people have eaten these things for thousands of years. We need to stop letting people determine what is healthy. If it's made in a factory, it's most likely not. And if it comes from the wild, it probably is. So shrimp should be wild caught. We don't want them farmed and eating plastics and things like that. So if they can be wild caught, that's great. I would say most likely the farm raised are going to be the things that we need to be afraid of, because who knows what's in them. But again, if that's all you can afford or that's all you have access to, it's probably better than eating like tofu. Hi, you've said before that not being hungry when you wake up in the morning is bad. What does it mean? I've always been like this. Food in the morning sounds gross to me. It's usually a sign that the liver needs support. Maybe our gallbladder is a little sluggish. We have lots of sludge, gallbladder is not flowing, or we just have imbalanced blood sugar. We're waking up with tons and tons of stress hormones. An easy way to start working on this is to make sure we're eating every 3 hours throughout the day. And we eat a bedtime snack that contains some carbs and protein 30 minutes before we go to bed. Once we go to bed, our blood sugar should stay stable for about 8 to 10 hours. If you wake up around 2 a.m., that means most likely that your hunger woke you up. You might not feel hungry, but you are hungry and you need to eat something. Usually half a banana will do the trick and get you back to sleep to where that you'll wake up in the morning. And oftentimes women need to force themselves to eat a little something at first. Right when they wake up, I usually recommend about 30 minutes from waking until they can get their appetite and hunger back, because hunger is a gauge for how well our metabolism is doing. And if we're not hungry, we're having a problem. Having many reoccurring UTIs, how do I get rid of them? I have to take antibiotics every time to get them. Already take diagnose, pure cranberry juice, VSL probiotic, inulin fiber, what gives? All those things worry me because, for example, like if you're taking the same probiotic long term, that's going to be a problem. It can cause other imbalances. I personally only do spore-based probiotics like Just Thrive or Megaspore Biotic, and maybe a few other ones depending on someone's situation, but I don't take a lot of other probiotics long term or recommend clients do that because it can cause other imbalances. Inulin fiber can be a problem for some people because it's feeding certain microbes that they want gone, and so supplementing specific fibers can sometimes be a problem. And then like diagnose and cranberry juice, those types of things are great support for the urinary tract, but if there's underlying issues going on, then they usually don't do enough. So I usually recommend like a spore-based probiotic, eating a raw carrot every single day, and then if that's not enough, doing like Just Thrive's prebiotic as well, and sometimes actually doing like some type of like kidney support, and there's one supplement that I sometimes use called Retinamide, but usually your UTIs and urinary tract infections are a sign of underlying issues going on, whether it's interstitial cystitis, like the urine or pelvic floor imbalances. So for example, when we pee and we're not getting all of the urine out of our bladder and it goes back into our bladder, there's bacteria that's going back in and back in. So do you have pelvic floor issues? There's so many little caveats. So you want to keep exploring. You want to keep asking the right question, which you are, why, what's got to give. But there is probably an underlying imbalance driving that. How did you transition from keto to moderate carb? I went definitely too fast and just jumped right into it. Gained about 15 pounds, but my body needed it, and I felt so much better right away. But if I was to do it again, I probably would start with just fructose, so things like raw honey and like fruit juice, a little bit at a time, and then work up to some root vegetables like potatoes, and I would just go slow. If I was at, for example, I was on like 10 grams of net carbs a day, so I needed carbs quick, but if I was like, for example, on 50 grams of carbs, I would work up to like 70 grams, and then like 90 grams to 100, 130, like I would slowly work up to where I'm at today, which is around like 250. At what point are you drinking too much water? When you're drinking and you're not thirsty. We should only drink when we're thirsty because that's what our craving for water is. Thirst tells us our body needs more hydration. And so oftentimes people are just forcing themselves to chug water like constantly. And I'm like, why? Like our body tells us when we need water. It's called thirst. What brand of vitamin C do you recommend? I have a whole highlight story on vitamin C. I really like Whole Foods vitamin C. Personally, I like Pure Synergy. I like that brand. What are your thoughts on using a propolis supplement? It can be really beneficial. It is high in like B vitamins and it's very immunosupportive. So propolis can be a great addition. I like lauricidin for the same reason. But yeah, any type of B product is super immunosupportive. Tips for crappy sleep when ovulating and in the lead up to my period. I'm taking 100 milligrams of progesterone and 400 milligrams of magnesium glycinate before bed, but still wake up at 2 a.m. Where's your blood sugar balance? Are you eating every 3 hours? Are you eating something 30 minutes before bed that has some carbs and protein? The goal would be to get around 80 to 100 grams of protein per day, making sure we're staying above 150 carbs a day at least. Most of the time people are sleeping crappy because their body literally is stuck in a fight or flight state. It does not have the fuel that it needs. And simply just eating more carbohydrates and more protein if necessary fixes that issue because it's helping them detoxify estrogen. If you are not eating enough, your liver is not moving estrogen out of the body. Sometimes B vitamins can also help because B vitamins are necessary to move estrogen out of the body. So those are some things I would think about. What are your thoughts on progesterone in relationship to my monthly cycle? I don't know personally, but personally I think bioidentical progesterone can be very supportive. In my new Mend Your Cycle mini class, I do have a whole lesson on bioidentical progesterone and how to supplement it properly, because I think a lot of people think it's going to be like this fix-all, and then they have adverse reactions because they're not actually doing the right things with a bioidentical progesterone. It's not the only thing that's necessary to heal our hormones, and if we think that it's going to be to help us and we're not eating frequently, we're not eating enough protein, we're not eating enough carbs, we're not supporting estrogen detoxification, it's most likely going to make us feel worse, or we're not going to see many results from it at all. My phone froze, so I apologize if you've already seen this, but it's not gonna, I already answered that question, pretty much just saying like blood sugar really needs to be supported. Eat every 3 hours, make sure you're eating about 30 minutes before bed, and if you're waking up hungry in the middle of the night, it's a really good idea to eat something. Oftentimes we're waking up hungry, but we don't really know that because we're not like experiencing those hunger pangs before we wake up, and so it can be something that really relaxes the body and gets us back to sleep. I've always heard about caffeine competing for estrogen metabolism in the liver. Is that true? Something to worry about? Personally, I don't think it's a problem. I think people are blowing that way out of proportion. If you have limited liver health, meaning you're on a low carb diet, you are stressed the hell out because you're intermittent fasting, then of course. But if you are working on becoming completely nourished and abundant, I don't think it's really a problem to worry about. I actually think it can be very supportive to estrogen metabolism. We just need to make sure we're getting enough B vitamins, we're getting enough protein, which is why I emphasize the nutrient-dense eating. Thoughts on supplementing minerals without getting tested first? I don't think it's a really good idea. Maybe things like sodium, potassium, magnesium, we're always needing those things, but a lot of times people are not taking enough. So for example, if someone's super deficient in potassium, they're going to need like 5,000 milligrams of potassium from foods and supplement sources combined a day just to get their levels up. And it can be very hard to get that amount of potassium, but that could be dangerous for somebody that doesn't need that amount. So it's really important to know where you're at, or you're going to kind of just be like not really making much progress at all. And mineral balancing has a lot of caveats. So, I actually work on people balancing their minerals. Like I want to get your levels up to where they need to be. So you start moving metals. So you start actually detoxifying. So your liver starts working properly. Like there's a difference between supplementing minerals and working on actually balancing your mineral levels. Is there anything topical that will help alopecia spots? Also, do you offer a service to read hair tissue mineral analysis tests, translation in basic terms? Yeah, I have a bundle that is just an HTMA, an hour session, and a protocol based on your HTMA. So we talk about it for an hour. I give you a protocol, walk you through why, how, what the goal is, and that is available on my website. You can go to the link in my bio. When it comes to alopecia spots, there's nothing topical that's going to completely help with that because that's an internal issue. If we are losing our hair, it's because our body is conserving energy, and that's just how it goes. If it's an immune issue, then prostaglandins and inflammation needs to be reduced within the body. So there are things that we need to be focused on if we're losing our hair. There are some topical things that I have for people to start working on their scalp. They're little mixes that people can make. I'm actually working on maybe possibly selling these things because I feel like a lot of people need them, like hair serums and some scalp sprays and kind of a system. And I usually do teach that to my clients that are struggling with hair loss. It is a little bit comprehensive, so I like to teach them and get them started on it. You've talked about how bad PMS cramps are a sign of estrogen dominance. Since using estrogen detox methods, my PMS cramps are so much better, but I do get ovulation cramps. Is this the same? Like slight ovulation cramps or cramping, like it's called, oh my gosh, I'm blanking. I literally just said it when I was teaching my class this morning. Oh my gosh, it starts with an M. Oh, middle schmerz. It's called middle schmerz. And it's like slight cramping when you actually feel yourself ovulate. But we shouldn't experience too much cramping or too much discomfort. It could be like a little bit of a sign of inflammation. And what is the healthy length for a period? Is 3 days too short? 3 days can be too short, but depending on what type of period products you're using. So if you're using like a menstrual cup or you're using pads or something where you're letting the menstrual blood flow out of you, it can really shorten your period. For example, like I found that when I was using menstrual cups or tampons, I was having a bleed for 4 to 6 days, whereas when I use pads, I have like a 2.5 to 3 day bleed because it's just gone. So, and I bleed faster and harder, but that's fine because my period's over a lot quicker. So that's something that I've noticed and a lot of other women have noticed, but it really just depends on what products you're using. But if it's 3 days and it's really light, that's where you would want to worry. But you also want to look at the color, right? You want it to be like very vibrant, kind of a cranberry juice color. If it's a really like blueberry jam color, it's probably estrogen. If it's like a strawberry juice color, like really light pink, then that's kind of a sign that possibly there's too much progesterone, or there's maybe some other issues going on, that the body needs more nourishment, lots of stress, lots of cortisol. So you kind of want to look at everything in context, like how much are we bleeding? We want to be bleeding around 30 to 50 milliliters. We want it to be the right color, and the length can vary from woman to woman. Is your program useful for postmenopausal? I definitely think it is. I am making a lot of updates that will make it more useful, just because I think the first round of fully nourished students, I have over 200. They gave me their feedback. They wanted some changes, and so I'm making a few changes just so that transitioning your diet can be a lot easier. And a lot of women went too hard, too fast on the carbs, and they want a little bit more guidance on how to maintain their weight and plateau and possibly lose weight. And so I will be adding those things into Fully Nourished, which I think can help with women who are postmenopausal. I'm not saying that you struggle with weight. A lot of women with that are postmenopausal struggle with weight, which is why I'm bringing that up. But if that's not your issue or that's not your worry, then it's probably going to be a really good course as is. It's still available for purchase, even as it's being renovated. I just want you guys to know that, in 4 to 6 weeks, the content will be completely updated. Any tips for gaining weight in the healthy way? Yeah, eat more calories, but a lot of people that are having a hard time gaining weight have thyroid imbalances. I know a lot of people think that being hypothyroid causes weight gain, but it can actually cause people to be too thin and not be able to gain weight as well. So those are things to kind of consider, but usually just making sure I should preface this by saying staying at a healthy weight doesn't just mean staying being able to lose weight and stay at a healthy weight easily. It also means gaining some weight and staying at a healthy weight easily. So the same things that I talk about here apply to women who are trying to gain weight, but just a lot of times women that need to gain weight need to eat a lot more fat. So eating every 3 hours, making sure you're getting plenty of protein, plenty of carbohydrates, a lot of fats from things like coconut oil and dairy, like cottage cheese and cheeses and cream and butter and ghee and things like that. Ice cream is a wonderful food for gaining weight. It's a great food for everybody, but if you're trying to gain weight, you can probably do with a lot higher fat ice cream and a little bit more. So yeah, I would just make sure you're eating enough, definitely over 2,000 calories, and making sure that you're getting enough protein, enough carbs, balancing blood sugar. But yeah, I like ice cream for that. Your thoughts on hypothyroidism with SIBO, but had my gallbladder removed. Same thoughts. Hypothyroidism is going to drive SIBO, and as long as we're keeping our liver healthy and our thyroid healthy, usually we can do okay without a gallbladder. The only thing that I think kind of needs to happen is we either need to supplement with gallbladder or we need to supplement with ox bile. Oftentimes, because we don't make any bile or very little, we have bile imbalances. It's usually needed for the rest of our lives to keep the digestive tract clear and healthy. Is there any organ dysfunction linked to health issue on only one side of the body? Example, problems with fungal growth only on the right side. Do you mean like fungal growth internally? How do you know? But are you meaning just like maybe your feet or something like that? I've never heard of that before. That's really interesting. Thoughts on herbal parasite cleanses? Completed several that helped, but never helped completely. Already implementing way more carbs and sugar. Thank you so much for these lives. So valuable. Yeah, I don't think herbal parasite cleanses are needed unless you actually have parasites. Most people don't have parasites, they have bacteria issues. And so a lot of things that are anti-parasitic are also antibacterial. And so what's happening is when you're taking these herbal parasite cleanses or antibacterial cleanses, you're wiping out some of the bacteria that's driving your issues. You feel good for a little while, and then the bacteria grows back because you didn't change anything else. And so then you want to do another one. You're like, oh my God, I cleansed parasites. And then you let it grow back and you do it again. And what's really going on is you're feeling better with less bacteria in your small intestine. You're feeling better wiping out some of those bacteria. So the better approach is to do things that are going to lower bacteria in the small intestine over time. Things like eating a raw carrot every single day, working with like a spore-based probiotic, making sure you're not eating tons and tons of fermentable fibers like raw greens, tons of salads, cruciferous vegetables, tons of grains, tons of beans, tons of nuts and seeds. All of those things are just feeding those little critters. And so really working on transit time, getting food moving through your digestive tract very quickly is going to also improve our thyroid function and our metabolic function because we're getting junk out, but it's also going to lead to less overgrowth of bacteria overall. And then we're going to actually feel better in the long run rather than just doing these like little cleanses and then like feeling better for a little bit and then going back to how we were before. In your experience, do you think one can regain bone density due to 13 years of hypothalamic amenorrhea? I don't know. I think that for somebody that has HA, I work on not just hormones because those are very important, but we also work on nutrient-dense foods because we need the materials to rebuild the bones, right? We can't regain bone density if we're not actually I should say replete, or we're nourished in regards to things like calcium and other minerals. A lot of people that were in a state of HA also are in a completely depleted state. And so they think that getting their weight back is going to normalize everything, or getting their period back is going to normalize everything. That's not always the case. We need to actually replenish the things that were lost during those 13 years. And so it's very important. I think the body is amazing. I think it can heal from just about anything, but it needs the raw materials and the environment to do so. If it does not have the actual building blocks it needs to, for example, create bone, it can't build bone. It's not that it's impossible to heal. It's just that it's impossible to heal in that environment without the proper building blocks. For example, if you were going to build a house, you'd need lumber, you'd need the materials to do so. And so think of it in that sense. Oftentimes, years of HA means years of depletion and years of stress. And so oftentimes women are very depleted in things like calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. Those things need to be rebuilt and replenished. And oftentimes things can start to restore. How can I help heal my PIH? They are red marks. I'm not sure what PIH means. I probably do know what it means, but I'm not, in this context, I'm not. So please clarify. Would you ever consider offering an analysis session for HTMA? I do have one available. It's on my website. It is a package of an HTMA, so the whole package includes a hair tissue mineral analysis, an hour session with me, and a month of coaching post-session. And I have a client portal that you guys will have access to, and you can share everything that you need to share. We can talk back and forth, and I will review your food journals for a month. But yeah, I do offer a session and analysis for an HTMA. Phone froze, sorry, is popcorn okay? Popcorn, is it okay? That's my question for you. Never ask somebody else if it's okay. It's just one of those things where you kind of need to know if it destroys your digestive tract and leaves you feeling really bloated and makes your bowel movements weird, then it's probably not a good idea. But if you do really good with popcorn, it's something you crave, it's something that you like, then by all means, go for it. What book, classes, sources do you recommend to educate ourselves? Thank you. I'm actually working on a page on my website that has a lot of resources for you guys so that you can go and do a lot of research on your own and dig into this on your own. But I really like starting with maybe the book called Once a Month by Dr. Katharina Dalton. I really like the book From PMS to Menopause by Dr. Ray Peat. I also like Dr. Ray Peat's website. He has wonderful articles, so many articles, so amazing. And they're really going to take you, you're going to read through them, you're not going to understand them completely. You're going to have to take a sentence maybe and then go take it to Google and start Googling things so you truly understand what that sentence means. But that's how you do research. If you don't understand something, you don't give up. You just go and dig deeper and you work until you can understand. But I find that Dr. Ray Peat, who's very smart, he's a very smart PhD, he's been a biologist his whole life, does a very good job of taking really complicated science and breaking it down. So Instagram's cutting me off, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this live and I'm going to go live again, and if anyone wants to ask questions and rejoin with me, you totally can. I'll go live for another like 40 minutes, so I'll see you in a second.